Today's story starts in a quiet paint shop in North Carolina on a blisteringly hot Saturday afternoon in June of 2008. Inside, 44-year-old Kim Spangler was stocking paint cans like she had for years, just another day at work. But that routine was about to be shattered. One of her co-workers came over and lightly tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, Kim," they said, "there's an alarm going off in the parking lot. We think it's your car." Now, this wasn't the kind of thing you'd normally panic over, but Kim did. Her face turned pale. She mumbled a quick, "Thanks," and walked to the counter to grab her purse. From inside, she fished out her car keys, but not like someone just going to turn off a nuisance alarm. She held them clenched in her fist, one key sticking out between her fingers like a weapon. As Kim stepped into the sweltering sun, the sound of her car alarm pierced the air. But it wasn't the noise that had her heart racing. She was scanning, darting her eyes across the lot over every parked car, every possible blind spot. She was on edge, watching, waiting, because she wasn't just worried about someone stealing her car. Kim was worried about Ricky. A few months earlier, Kim had broken up with a man named Ricky Simmons. The relationship had been toxic. Ricky was 49, and when they met 5 years earlier, both were in dark places. Kim was battling substance abuse, and Ricky, well, he'd just gotten out of prison. He'd served time for manslaughter, but when they first got together, Kim saw something in him. She thought he was damaged, sure, but misunderstood. Like her. That sense of kinship had drawn them in. But the longer they were together, the darker things became. When Kim finally got sober, Ricky didn't support her. In fact, he resented it. And not long after, she left him for good. She thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Ricky started stalking her, showing up outside her apartment, calling nonstop, acting increasingly unhinged. Kim even had to file a restraining order. And that might have helped, if Ricky cared about the law. But she knew better. And there was something else that haunted her, something that made her terror far more than just paranoid imagination. Around the time of their breakup, Ricky had also started bothering another woman, Jamie Fraley. Jamie wasn't just anyone she was engaged to, Ricky's own son. And then, suddenly, Jamie disappeared. Just gone. And Ricky, he was the prime suspect. So yeah, when Kim stepped into that parking lot holding her keys like a weapon, it wasn't just fear, it was survival. But she didn't see anyone, just her car still wailing. So she clicked her fob, silenced the alarm, cautiously approached. No broken windows, no damage, no signs anyone had broken in. Maybe someone just bumped it, she told herself. Maybe I'm just paranoid. She went back inside and finished her shift, but Kim couldn't shake it. When her shift ended, she walked back out toward her car. Same ritual keys clutched in her fist, glancing everywhere. Still no sign of Ricky. She got in, locked the doors, blasted the AC, and finally breathed. And then she noticed the mess. Her car was filthy. Trash everywhere. Dirty clothes piled in the back seat. It smelled bad, and she winced, realizing she was supposed to pick up friends for church in the morning. Embarrassed, she made a mental note, clean the car tonight. Except she didn't. When she got home, exhaustion won. She looked at the car's side and thought, I'll do it in the morning. But the next morning, she overslept. Her alarm didn't go off. She leapt out of bed, rushed outside, and winced at the smell as she got into her messy car. She stuffed trash into compartments and rolled the windows down to air it out. Her friends were polite, but she could tell they noticed. After church, Kim went about her day groceries, errands, and finally, around 6 p.m., she pulled into her driveway, determined. "Okay, I'm cleaning this car now." She started by pulling out all the trash from the front and back. Food wrappers, receipts, gym bags. Then she made her way to the trunk where she kept her gym clothes. She popped it open and froze. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Because inside her trunk, lying twisted and stiff, was Ricky Simmons. Dead. To understand what happened, we need to rewind 24 hours. Saturday morning. That alarm. It wasn't an accident. Ricky had broken into her car. He knew her routine. He knew that every Saturday Kim went to the gym, then to work, that she left her dirty gym clothes in the trunk and always cleaned them out that night. Ricky had crawled into her trunk clutching a knife. He planned to wait ambush her when she opened it that evening. But that night, she never did. She was too tired. So Ricky stayed in that trunk in the North Carolina summer heat, sealed inside. And by the time Kim opened it the next day, he was dead, still clutching the knife, still waiting. By sheer accident, by simply skipping her routine, Kim had saved her own life. And Jamie Ricky's son's fiancée. Her body was never found, but police believe Ricky killed her too. What's terrifying isn't just what he did, it's what almost happened. November 15th, 2004, Del Mar, New York. It was a quiet Monday morning when Peter Porco woke up and began his normal routine. He climbed out of bed, shuffled to the bathroom, relieved himself. Then he stood in front of the mirror and shaved. He got dressed in his work clothes, walked downstairs, brewed a pot of coffee, and while it percolated, he unloaded the dishwasher. After that, he loaded in the dirty dishes, started the cycle, made himself a quick breakfast, and walked out the front door to grab the newspaper. But when he realized he'd locked himself out, he casually bent down, picked up the spare key hidden under the doormat, and let himself back inside. He sat down, drank his coffee. Read the paper, packed himself a lunch, and walked to the front door again, ready to start the workday. And then Peter Porco collapsed. Dead. He had been dead the entire time. Let's rewind. Earlier that morning, sometime in the middle of the night, Peter Porco and his wife Joan were brutally attacked in their sleep. Someone had entered their two-story home and bludgeoned both of them with a fireman's axe. Peter was struck 16 times in the head. Joan, while still in bed, was hit so hard her skull fractured. Somehow, Peter didn't die immediately. Instead, with most of his brain effectively destroyed, he had gotten up and started his morning routine like it was any other Monday. That routine was etched so deeply into his subconscious that even as he bled out internally, even as one eye was blinded and his jaw was destroyed, Peter's body continued moving on autopilot, until it didn't. When Peter failed to show up for work that morning, his co-workers were concerned. He was never late, never missed a day. They tried calling. No answer. Eventually, a court officer was sent to check on him. What he found when he opened the door was a nightmare. Peter's lifeless body was lying in the foyer, massive head trauma visible at a glance. The officer stepped back outside and called 911. Police arrived, cordoned off the house, and went upstairs. That's where they found Joan Porco, still in bed, also suffering from horrific head injuries. But unlike Peter, Joan was still alive. Barely. She was rushed to the hospital and immediately placed in a medically induced coma. Meanwhile, police began investigating. What they found was strange. The phone line had been cut. The home's alarm system had been physically smashed. A screen on one of the windows was slashed as if someone had broken in. But nothing was missing. Peter's wallet was still full of cash. Joan's jewelry was untouched. No signs of robbery. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was personal. Then, tucked away in a bedroom closet, investigators found the weapon. It was a fireman's axe. It belonged to the Porcos. Whoever had done this didn't bring a weapon. They used one from inside the house, which meant they likely knew their way around. That left only a few suspects. At the time of the attack, the Porcos had 2 adult sons. Jonathan, a naval officer stationed in Connecticut, and Christopher, a 21-year-old student at the University of Rochester. Jonathan was ruled out almost immediately. He had been on a nuclear submarine at the time of the murders. But Christopher, well, that was more complicated. In fact, Chris learned about his father's death from a news report. The story of a well-liked suburban couple being axed in their home was splashed across headlines and news broadcasts. Shocked, Chris called the police. Here's part of that phone call. Hi. My name is Chris Porco. I was just called by the Times-Union saying that my parents were found dead this afternoon. I was wondering if you had any information for me. Now, take a moment. Think about how someone should sound after hearing something like that. Shocked, frantic, desperate. Chris sounded like he was ordering takeout. Calm, flat, emotionless. Because Chris Porco was no grieving son. He was the killer. It turned out in the months leading up to the attack, Chris had been lying to everyone. He was failing out of school. He had forged his father's signature to take out massive student loans. And when Peter found out, he and Joan wrote their son a stern email. They expressed their disappointment, but also their love. They wanted to help him get back on track. Chris's response: he drove home in the middle of the night, snuck into the house, and attacked them both. While they slept, he used their own axe, and after he finished, he drove back to campus, pretending nothing had happened. Here's the part that still haunts people. Peter, not knowing he was dying, got up and went about his entire morning routine. He was so badly injured that his brain couldn't process what had happened. It simply defaulted to habit. He shaved, made coffee, read the paper, packed a lunch, all while bleeding out. That single fact disturbed investigators, doctors, and the public alike. It was the ultimate display of human autopilot and how little our minds may actually require to continue forward, even after the point of death. As for Joan, when she finally woke from her coma, she had no memory of the attack. Or at least that's what she claimed. Because when paramedics first found her, Joan had nodded when asked if her son Chris was the attacker. And yet, after she recovered, Joan posted bail for Chris, $250,000. And during the trial, she sat beside him in court, hand in hand. He was ultimately convicted of murdering his father and attempting to murder his mother, sentenced to 50 years to life. To this day, Joan still visits him in prison, and no one knows for sure whether she truly forgot what happened or simply couldn't accept the truth. Amstetten, Austria, 1984, when 18-year-old Elizabeth Fritzl vanished without a trace. No one had any idea the horrifying truth wouldn't come to light for another 24 years. At first, her disappearance seemed like just that, a teenage girl who ran away from home. That belief was reinforced when her parents received a strange letter postmarked from 2 towns over. In it, Elizabeth claimed she was tired of living under their roof and had gone off to join a cult. She begged them not to search for her. Her father, Joseph Fritzl, told police she'd been dabbling in strange beliefs lately. He insisted she had run off voluntarily. Police took him at his word. What they didn't know was that Joseph had lured his daughter into the basement of their family home. He'd been working on a bomb shelter for years, using the Cold War as an excuse. But that shelter was no shelter. It was a cell. A secret underground prison, soundproofed and sealed behind a fake shelving unit, hidden behind a 3-foot-high security door, one that only he had the code to open. When Elizabeth stepped into that basement to help him install the last piece of the door, Joseph slammed it shut behind her. Then he pressed a chloroform-soaked rag to her face. She woke up chained to a wall, and she would not step outside again for more than 2 decades. For the first 5 years, Elizabeth was completely alone. Her only contact with the outside world was her father, who came down every few days to bring food, torment her, and assault her. Then came the children. In total, Elizabeth gave birth to 7 of Joseph's children in that dungeon. Alone, with no medical help, no anesthesia, no midwife, just a pair of scissors and an old book about childbirth. One baby, born in 1996, had respiratory issues and died within days. Joseph took the body and burned it in their furnace. Eventually, 3 of the children grew too noisy for Joseph's liking. So he stole them from Elizabeth and staged a bizarre lie, placing them on his front doorstep with forged letters claiming Elizabeth had left the children there for him and his wife, Rosemarie, to raise. Rosemarie never questioned it. For 24 years, she lived above the dungeon unaware or unwilling to believe what was happening beneath her feet. In 2008, Elizabeth's oldest daughter, Kirsten, grew gravely ill. After begging and pleading, Elizabeth convinced Joseph to take her to the hospital. That decision cracked the whole case open. Doctors were stunned. Kirsten's condition was unlike anything they had seen. She had no medical records, no documentation, and her skin was so pale it was nearly translucent. The man who brought her in, claiming to be her grandfather, was evasive, rude, aggressive. It was Joseph. When police arrived to question him, he presented another forged letter from Elizabeth, claiming Kirsten had shown up at his door and she couldn't care for her anymore. Desperate to save Kirsten's life, doctors and police made a public appeal. Elizabeth, if you're out there, please come forward. Your daughter's life depends on it. And somehow, it worked. A week later, Joseph showed up at the hospital, and behind him was Elizabeth. She was gaunt, hollow-eyed, hair gone white. She looked like a ghost. She barely spoke to the doctors. She avoided eye contact. And when they gently asked about Kirsten's medical history, Elizabeth trembled, then fled into the hallway with Joseph. What she didn't know was that police were waiting. They separated the two immediately. In her interrogation, Elizabeth was silent for 5 hours. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'll tell you everything, but only if you promise I'll never have to see my father again." The detectives agreed, and what followed was one of the most nightmarish stories ever told. Police raided the Fritzl home. Using the code Joseph had given them, they unlocked the basement prison and found two of Elizabeth's children still living in that underground maze. One child, just 5 years old, had never seen the sky. They were rushed to the hospital and reunited with their siblings. And remarkably, Kirsten survived. Her condition, severe vitamin D deficiency, she'd never been exposed to sunlight. Authorities provided Elizabeth and her children with new identities. They were moved to a secure location. To this day, they live in total secrecy. As for Joseph Fritzl, he was sentenced to life in prison. He's considered one of the most hated inmates in Austria. In 2016, other prisoners attacked him, knocking out several of his teeth. He's now in solitary confinement. And yet, he's eligible for parole in 2024. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, another nightmare was unfolding, this time in Canada. British Columbia, T90s. Robert Pickton and his brother lived on a decrepit pig farm just outside Vancouver. The land was filthy, the buildings decaying, and the brothers rarely bathed. Yet despite their squalor, the land was valuable, and when they sold large portions to developers, they became instant millionaires. What did they do with the money? They started a charity. On paper, it was called the Piggy Palace Good Time Society, a nonprofit designed to throw events and raise money for good causes. In reality, it was a cover. Inside their abandoned slaughterhouse, they threw massive parties. Biker gangs, drug addicts, and sex workers came from all over, up to 2,000 people at a time. And that's when women started disappearing. From Vancouver's downtown east side, dozens of women, primarily sex workers, vanished. The community noticed. The police didn't. When families pleaded for help, authorities brushed it off. They claimed the women were drug users, likely runaways. Then in 1997, one woman escaped. Her name was Wendy. She stumbled to a neighbor's house, bleeding, handcuffed with a stab wound in her stomach. She told doctors that Robert Pickton had attacked her at one of his parties. She'd fought back, stabbed him, and fled. Later that night, Robert showed up at the same hospital with a stab wound to his face. He had the key to Wendy's handcuffs in his pocket. He was arrested, but then let go. Police believed his story that Wendy attacked him, and they dropped the charges. Over the next few years, dozens more women vanished. One employee, Bill, became suspicious and repeatedly called Crime Stoppers. But no one listened until 2002. A former worker tipped off police that Robert had illegal firearms. Finally, they got a warrant to search his trailer. What they found was beyond horror. Women's belongings, blood, remains. Robert Pickton was arrested. While in jail, he unknowingly shared a cell with an undercover officer. In a recorded conversation, he boasted about killing 49 women and feeding their remains to his pigs. The rest he ground up and mixed with pork, served as sausage at his parties. He even donated it to local charities. Only 26 victims were identified. The rest dissolved in the soil, the pigs, the rendering plant. Pickton was sentenced to life in prison, but he was never convicted for all 49. The most haunting part, his brother and the people who must have known were never charged. And finally, North London. 1983. Residents of Cranley Gardens started complaining about their plumbing. The drains were clogged. When the plumber arrived and opened a pipe, he pulled out a wad of flesh. At first he thought it was rotten meat, but when a pathologist examined it, He gave a chilling answer. "This is human tissue, a neck." The trail led to apartment 23. The man who answered the door was calm, polite, a bit off. His name, Dennis Nilsson. When officers asked where the rest of the body was, he sighed and pointed toward his bedroom closet. "In 2 plastic bags," he said. But that was just the beginning. Inside his flat, Dennis had stored at least 15 corpses in his closet, under floorboards, even in his bed. For 5 years, he lured young men back to his apartment. Many were homeless or struggling. He'd offer food, drink, a place to sleep. Then, when they let their guard down, he'd strangle them or drown them. Afterward, he'd bathe them, dress them, and sleep beside them. He said the corpses were beautiful. Eventually, the bodies piled up, so he began cutting them into pieces and flushing them down the toilet, which is what led to the clogged pipes. And his capture. Dennis Nilsson confessed to all 15 murders. He was sentenced to life in prison. He never showed remorse. In 2018, he died behind bars, alone, where he belonged. These stories remind us behind quiet towns, behind closed doors, behind ordinary faces, unspeakable darkness can hide. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're standing right beside you.